Welcome to our weekly series of Healthcare Scene Google Plus Hangouts, where we sit down with top leaders in healthcare IT. Before we begin, I want to remind those watching the live session that you can tweet any questions to the account at EHR and HIT, and we'll see if we can incorporate them. Sometimes it's difficult, but if we can, we will, or definitely we can have Mandi follow up after. So today we're excited to have the lovely, the wonderful, the all-around healthcare data geek, Mandi Bishop from Adaptive Project Solutions with us. Mandi is also a contributor to my blog, emrandhipaa.com, where she's written a number of excellent pieces that I'm sure many of you have read. So I'm pleased to have her here with me today.
Thanks, John. I haven't written nearly enough, or really frequently enough to count, but I look forward to continuing to contribute on a regular basis. So thanks for having me. I'm excited.
Yeah, well, I think all of my readers would agree that you haven't posted enough. So, so let's start off this chat with kind of a general question. You know, how about you tell us about the state of big data in healthcare, since you're the big data expert.
I'm hardly a big data expert. I would definitely defer to folks like Fred Trotter, to fit that bill, but I am a big data lover, let's say that. I enjoy it. I think that the possibilities for analytics of big data, healthcare data analytics, are tremendous. But I think that right now we are still so siloed in our data capture and in our storage mechanisms. Like our big data exists, but big data is existent in payer silos, in large integrated delivery network silos. It's found within the HIE, but we have not yet reached a tipping point at which the vector between the HIE and the payer can be intersected, or where your personal health information, quantified self data, can be integrated into the big data from your payer to look at your claims data as it relates to your quantified self data. So we're getting there, and I think that there's certainly a lot of excitement in the industry for the analytics that are possible, and I think that the value of big data as a buzzword certainly has grown in the last couple of years, but we are not yet to a point where it can be leveraged appropriately.
So, what do you think it's gonna take to kind of merge those silos, and I guess related, is there a will to really do that? Because it doesn't seem like it's a technical problem, is it?
Well, in part, you have an industry that 15 years ago was required to keep its data locked down, right? So 15, 20 years ago, you were expected to maintain all of your data within the four walls of the hospital, for example, or within your individual doctor's offices. And now, in leaps and bounds, the industry and the world has changed. So the Internet of Everything, has happened. And we all expect instant gratification, and we expect that the healthcare industry is going to be able to react as quickly as other industries to this influx of data and to this demand for data ownership on behalf of the patient, private citizens. And unfortunately, we designed a system that didn't support that ideal. So the software, the vendors, the database models, everything about the healthcare system from a technology standpoint was built to maintain information within four walls and to keep that information proprietary. So labs, for example, lab results within the four walls of a hospital, labs have proprietary codes assigned to them. They don't use LINQ codes, so they don't use what has become kind of the global industry standard for coding, what a lab result is, what equipment it was taken on, how it was calibrated. There are standards for that, but each one of the independent labs, each one of the hospital facilities has their own way of defining what a lab is, what the code is that was done or what the test that was done, how those results should be calculated, and how the equipment was calibrated. So we've created this mess for ourselves, and unfortunately, I think there's an appetite, certainly on behalf of the patients, and I hope that the more and more we can educate using social media and other means, the more and more we can educate patients to start to demand this change, we can educate providers to start to demand this change, that the EMR vendors and others will begin to comply, and we will start to see more open APIs into the data layer of EMRs, for example.
So, I mean, let's imagine that there was the will, right? Whether it was forced by consumers who said, yeah, you better start exchanging data, whether it's doctors who saying, I need this data, let's make it happen. So let's just imagine that there was the will for these organizations to start sharing data. Are there still challenges there associated? I mean, for example, I guess you mentioned some of the standards, or let's say their will was there. What technical challenges or standards challenges still remain, even if they said, okay, let's start sharing tomorrow?
Oh, a ton, and this kind of goes back to an old favorite topic of mine, which is Doug Fritzma's, the high jump and long jump of interoperability, right? Mm-hmm. So the long jump are the small incremental steps that the Office of the National Coordinator and others are taking towards creating data standards and guidelines and involving more and more of the larger organizations, the EMR organizations, lots of the systems integrators in assisting to develop those standards so that they can be incorporated into future releases of their product, and the data will be able to be exchanged in a much more natural fashion. But it will take a very long time for us to get to what Fritzma calls the high jump of interoperability, which is true semantic level interoperability, where not only is the transport mechanism standardized, and so I can accept your data in whatever format you send, but the format of the data is the same, and then beyond the format of the data, each one of the content elements, each one of those data attributes uses the same vocabulary. So when I say, this allergy medication or this particular allergy, that has exactly the same meaning universally for anybody, using that same data set.
Sure.
And we're not there yet, and it will be years.
Yeah, so
my lifetime.
It will take a lifetime, right?
Yeah.
I mean, what are the opportunities that we're kind of missing out on when it comes to this? Like if we could exchange this data, what opportunities are we missing out on because we're not doing that?
Oh my gosh. Well, if we could exchange data at that level, have that semantic layer of interoperability between EMRs, or even between EMRs. So I travel all over the country, right? And should I have an accident in California, I would like for that information to be immediately available to all of the providers who take care of me in Florida, as well as to a specialist that I might go to see in Texas. And I would want them all to have access to that information instantaneously. Right now, there's a lot of permutations that we have to go through within health information exchanges. So there's the state-to-state, the HIX, Health Information Exchange, and there's the HIE, the clinical data level data exchange that's happening. And that semantic level, making sure that not only is the format consistent and the transport mechanism is consistent, but that the vocabularies are consistent, it's not happening. And so the likelihood that I may be given duplicate tests, for example, or that a misdiagnosis could occur, or that some of my clinical information would have been lost in transit because it didn't meet the arcane standards of one of the clearinghouse mechanisms along the way. Like, all of those opportunities exist for improvement. But I think that the possibilities for population health management are tremendous. If we get to a place where we are all using the same vocabularies, where we are all using the same content format, where we're all using the same transport mechanisms, that creates the opportunity for these APIs into social media, into quantified self data, into personal health records, and it allows me, the patient, to contribute in a meaningful way to my own true medical history and to get context that would assist in diagnosis and treatment.
So, I know you've done a lot of work with big data with the insurance plans, and you've worked with them on a number of projects. So, it seems like they're able to share and absorb the clinical data. I mean, they're pulling it from all sorts of sources, but why can they do it and the rest of healthcare can't seem to do that?
Well, some of them do it better than others, right? Each one of the ones that I have worked with is at a different stage of maturity. But the answer to that question is really money, right? It costs a tremendous amount of money to build, because these vocabularies don't exist, right? And because you are getting big data that is structured and unstructured, and even the structured data doesn't follow a consistent structure pattern for every source. So you might be getting the same type of clinical data from each one of, say, 3,000 providers, but every single one of those 3,000 providers sends it to you with slightly different data elements populated. And of those data elements that are populated, some are using LOINC, some are using SNOMED codes. So you have to have the capacity to perform that mapping and do all of that reference linking and to create like a data warehouse and to create all of the operational data stores in a true analytics environment, which costs a lot of money and takes a lot of time to build. So that's, I mean, the long and short of it is that insurance companies have money, and they have the ability to build these structures to support the translation that's currently required because that semantic layer of interoperability doesn't yet exist.
Hmm. So, I mean, you know, if they've invested all this money aggregating it, I guess the reason why they don't make it more open is that it's a competitive advantage for them to have that data.
Yes.
I mean, it almost is like you've aggregated it all. Let's let the rest of healthcare do good. But I guess if they do that, then every other insurance company gets access to the data, and that's not good for competitive. Is that
right?
Fair to say?
Well, I think, and I think that it is. I mean, it's a competitive advantage in many ways, right? Because, you know, we're talking the ACO model as the accountable care organization model moves forward. The ability to leverage clinical data and big data and use, you know, clinical context in conjunction with claims data to form your network contracts, you know, and to evaluate provider performance for ACO networks. Right. It's tremendous. You're looking at clinical outcomes, and you're able to actually evaluate outcomes performance for each one of your providers. And a lot of payers are now looking at member attribution models based on, you know, in some form, clinical data. So it is definitely a competitive advantage because you can get much more accurate information the more data that you are collecting. So.
Well, and that's interesting. I know that Allscripts recently announced a deal where they would supply clinical data to the health plans. I know it was through another company that kind of they would supply the clinical data, which I think is an interesting move. And I think many of us realize that EHR vendors are doing this. So I thought it was interesting that Allscripts announced it because so many of them don't announce it. But should patients and doctors be really concerned about the insurance plans, the health plans, having access to the EMR data?
Well, yes and no. I think that it's definitely something to be aware of, but I do think that the reality is that it has already been happening, right? It's just that the latency of that data has been delayed, like the data's been delayed. So there have long been, for the last couple of years, there have long been efforts to integrate that EMR clinical data with the payers. Right now, some clearinghouses and some private HIEs are doing it already, and you have seen in the news over the last year or two, several of the large payers have been purchasing HIEs. They are doing this because they already automatically have access to, you know, the EMR data in real time, right, or pseudo real time. Sure. So it's, I mean, it is. I am surprised that they announced it, just like you. But I think, you know, the reality is there's a good and bad every time we consider the fact that our data may be exposed. And I prefer to look at the positive, you know, implications of the sooner my clinical data is joined with my claims data, and the sooner context can be derived from my particular clinical encounter, and you can look at it across a broader population of patients, you would be able to find perhaps a pattern or a specific risk factor associated with my clinical data that would not have been apparent to my individual doctor upstream because he only sees, you know, 100 patients. And of those 100 patients, only one may have this particular condition, whereas if it hits the payer, and the payer has, you know, millions and millions of lives, it is, you know, it's much more likely that patterns would emerge, and if they would emerge faster, and that there would be a more appropriate treatment plan designed for me in a more timely manner. So that's the good side. Of course, the bad side is, yeah, they know every single problem that I have pretty much as soon as I have it.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah, I think that there are very real dangers associated with, or I mean, from a patient standpoint, from an insurance plan holder standpoint, I would be concerned that my clinical data would impact the actuarial algorithms which determine my, you know, my premium. But unfortunately, that happens anyway, and I think that as that becomes more and more prevalent, we will begin to see more kind of lifestyle recommendations for healthcare, so that we can, as patients, we can become healthier individuals and have fewer and fewer of those oh crap moments where my data might get displayed to the plan.
Sure.
That's my hope.
I've argued that, I think the key to it all is really transparency of what's really happening. So, I guess I applaud Allscripts in announcing the deal so that, at least it's transparent that it's happening. And I hope that happens more with all the data sharing that happens. So.
Right. Yeah, I am glad that they announced it, unlike some of our other friends who have gone ahead with policies where they've been sharing data for months and months and months, and it's only recently come to light.
Sure. I want to kind of switch the flow a little bit now. You wrote a really compelling blog post on EMR and HIPAA, kind of where you discussed what you called the letter of the law and the spirit of the law when it comes to meaningful use stage 2. I thought it was a really interesting way to look at the way people are approaching meaningful use stage 2 attestation and compliance. Do you have some examples of where the letter of the law says one thing, but the spirit of the law is something very different? Something
else entirely. Yeah, there are several, and so let me kind of set the stage for what I was thinking. It has been, I truly believe in meaningful use, right? And as a proponent of data and talking about all this data capture and the opportunities for data, in order for us to make meaning from big data, we need to have small data capture. It needs to be accurate and it needs to be timely. So I really, truly believe that the meaningful use objectives, the spirit of the law, like what they're trying to do with meaningful use, is valid. And I think that the opportunity exists for there to be really positive outcomes, for there to improvements in care and in care coordination. I believe in those things. Mm-hmm. But that said, in the practical day-to-day implementation of these measures that are required, first, there will be people who say there's the carrot and the stick, right? And so you don't have to be an early adopter and you don't have to take the carrot. Well, honestly, you can't afford, as a provider, I'm seeing more and more and understanding and appreciating more and more, that as a provider, you really can't afford to do these upgrades that are necessary to keep up with, keep the pace of your peers, unless you are going for those meaningful use incentive dollars. It is virtually impossible for you to get there. So the pace is proving very difficult and is proving, is creating this opportunity for the following only the letter of the law, which is the bare bones minimum that I must achieve in order to get that checkbox for my meaningful use attestation, right? And so an example would be like a patient portal. You don't ever have to actually log in. A patient never has to log into a patient portal in order for that box to get checked for meaningful use. You need to only have a portal available, and the patients must receive a handout of some kind and/or an email which gives them instructions on how they can, if they choose to, enroll and log into a portal. You never actually have to have a discussion with your patient about the availability of their health information. You don't ever have to actually show them the portal. They do not ever have to actually visit it. Like, this is, it's a very easy way to baseline that particular check. And there are so many others, and it's very frustrating because I think meaningful use stage 2, to me, one of the true differentiators is that patient engagement component. And it's unfortunate that not only is the patient engagement, it's not meaningful, but in many cases it's unwelcome. The secure communications, for example, the secure messaging component for patient engagement for meaningful use stage 2 is very problematic for doctors. First, if you don't have the capability of doing it with a direct integration with your EMR, then you're causing a workflow issue where your doctor has to log in, or your doctor or your staff has to log into separate locations to be able to check messages in different places to be able to comply with meaningful use. Or, if you wanted to do the letter of the law, the very bare bones, you never have to check it at all. You never have to check your secure message. You just have to have a patient send it. You don't have to do anything with it.
Right.
So, I mean, it's very frustrating for me that it is, that it is so easy to game this system. And it's frustrating for me that even though it is this easy to game the system once the system's in place, it's so expensive and painful to get providers to the point where they are even able to take advantage of the opportunity to continuously improve after they've implemented their bare bones minimum.
So I mean, a lot of interesting points there, but do you think that organizations are really just gaming MU, or where they're just meeting the requirements just to get the money, or are they missing out on a lot of benefits, or is just the time frame so restricted that they don't have time to really worry about the benefits? They just need to meet the meaningful use requirements because they need the incentive money, and then also maybe even more so they're afraid of the penalties, right? So they're like, I have to meet this, come heck or high water, I'm going to it, right? And so what's the minimum that I can do because there's just not time to do more? Is that what you're seeing, or?
Yeah, well, and I do. So I think that given the situation now, and given the way that meaningful use regulations are written now and the way they're understood, providers don't have much of a choice unless they qualify for one of the exclusions, right? Because there are providers who qualify for exclusions. But if you do not qualify for an exclusion, then you will do meaningful use, as you said, come hell or high water. And if you don't do it now with the incentive dollars that are attached, then you have to drag yourself kicking and screaming and find the money. And where are you going to find the money to implement all of these changes if you don't get it from the incentive dollars? Because this isn't cheap. I mean, it's not just the implementation of the technology. It is bringing in the consultants who tell you how to interpret the meaningful use. I mean, the meaningful use mandates, these are confusing things, and then they're continuously coming out with additional FAQs and additional kind of clarifying statements to what the meaningful use regs mean. Which of course, is backwards to me as a software developer. You develop to requirements, and as a project manager too. Projects fail on requirements, and it's very clear to me that we did not define the requirements up front, right? So we've all been developing iteratively, and as a developer, I love that. I love the ability to continuously tinker and to kind of, throw stuff over the fence.
Sure.
But that's not a viable delivery mechanism for healthcare, which has a very expensive change rate adoption, right? They cannot adopt change quickly without it being hugely expensive, and not just in dollars, but in patient care. So yeah, I think right now, I mean, it's unfortunate, but if you don't qualify for an exclusion at this point, given the way that it's stated, you have to move forward with meaningful use.
So you bring up an interesting point about healthcare's inability to change quickly. I mean, we saw this in the programming world, right, where they went through, what is it called, water flow method, right, where you do one water flow style and then you start again, right? And you go through. Now they're changing it to where you can change any piece of code immediately and have it enacted really quickly and enabling people to change things. Do we need to go through that transformation in healthcare too, or can we?
I think that that's the rub, right? That's the disconnect, is that from a technology standpoint, from a software development life cycle, which is what you're talking through, we've moved from waterfall, that very traditional, you gather your requirements, you go through your design, you develop based on that design. We've gone from that traditional waterfall approach to an agile methodology, which is iteratively delivering value along the way. So you define a very small kind of minimum viable product, and then you continuously add enhancements to it. And that's the model that the Direct Project and others are taking in delivering against these objectives. But unfortunately, healthcare as a whole, and then the EMR vendors, let's just take the EMR vendors, I have a 6-month adoption rate, or I'm sorry, a 6-month lag time between when I have requested a contract signature, contract execution for an existing implementation of Direct, but it's 6 months out before I can get it. 6 months out before the resources are available who can implement it. And by the time that 6 months has passed, there will be a brand new implementation of Direct that is out, and I won't be able, that timeline starts over. So there's, the technology is being delivered very, very quickly at inception, but the adoption at the EMR vendor level is taking significant amount more time. And then you have, once the EMRs have adopted it, you have to implement and deploy it to the payer, or to the providers, which takes even longer. So it's a backwards funnel. It's very frustrating. Yeah.
Yeah.
And they don't have the ability to adopt that quickly. And so, I don't think you want them to, right? You want them to test out. You want to be able to have your ideas fully vetted and make sure that each one of these changes is meaningful and does create value for the patient and for the provider before you introduce it into a clinical workflow. And we're not doing that.
Yep. It's pretty complex. So is meaningful use completely devoid of value? Or I mean, I guess that's maybe an exaggeration, or maybe does it cause more problems than it solves, or are we? I mean, certainly it's. I think we've discussed before that it's the path towards, creating data, right? And even just getting people on EHR is a step forward. And so I think we all agree there. But does it really cause more problems than it solves?
I think that the current state of I think that stage 2 and then what I'm understanding of stage 3 do introduce a whole new set of complexities that we are not handling well. And I think, from my standpoint, I agree with the premise of meaningful use. I think that it is necessary. I believe in the power of health IT technology to transform healthcare. But I don't think that the way that it is moving forward at this pace and with all of these unknowns is going to create value. And there has been significant backlash, and I think that it will take years to recover from that backlash. So I would appreciate a saner approach to requiring that the meaningful use objectives be met. So I'd appreciate an extension to the incentives, with an understanding that the providers need the incentives in order to implement against the objectives. And the stick needs to be reevaluated, I think. There's going to be a natural selection process that's already occurring in the EMR vendors, right? We've narrowed it down from, 300 or so or more who are certified for stage 1.
Yeah.
The list is really small for stage 2.
Well, yeah. I think we'll see how that evolves, but
yeah.
It's interesting that there's it almost feels like a contradiction, right? Because at one point you're saying, well, you can easily game the patient engagement stuff because the patients don't even have to log into the portal. But on the other side, you're saying we should delay things, right? So I think a lot of people look at that and say, well, you're saying we should move faster, patients should actually start using it, we should require them to do this, right? But then on the other side, at least that there should be more, that you shouldn't be able to game it like that, right? And then on the other side, you're like, but we should delay the progress. Is that mostly because there's a technical barrier to implementation, and that's where the delay needs to happen, not necessarily how they do it?
Yeah. I mean, I do. Yeah, the delay needs to happen. I think that maybe whoever asked that question kind of misunderstood where I was saying that you can game the system. I don't condone gaming the system, but it happens, right? This is what people are having to do in order to, they are in a race to get the incentive dollars so that they can afford the upgrades that they have to do. And these are the easiest, this is the easiest way for them to get there. But it's not patient engagement. And so I think that meaningful use, in order for meaningful use to have meaning both to the patients and to the providers from a patient engagement standpoint, you want to engage your patient. And if a patient never has to log into a portal for that specific measure, for example, that's not engagement. So why don't we rethink the way that we have approached these measures and determine ways to derive value, ways to actually implement a system that can provide a measure of value to the provider and to the patient? Because ultimately this is about empowering the patients and engaging the patients and allowing us to have more freedom and control over our data and our destiny when it comes to our healthcare. So I don't condone gaming the system, and I don't think that that's an intended side effect of meaningful use regs as they're currently written. It's just an unfortunate reality is that there are a lot of us who sit in rooms and determine exactly what buttons must be clicked in what order in order for us to receive the attestation data capture that's required for us to report out that we've obtained that meaningful use stage 2 metric.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and maybe gaming the system's the wrong word. I guess it's meeting the minimum requirements. It goes back to the whole spirit of the law versus letter of the law.
Right.
And I think we're at letter of the law right now. So maybe an extra year will help people engage more with the spirit of the law and really go after the value rather than the minimum required effort. I don't know. It's going to be interesting.
I hope so, but I think that if we had, I think that there wasn't enough time, right? I think that the final measures were not released with the amount of detail that was required in order for a technical implementation to begin or a technical development cycle to begin for the EMRs. I think that a lot of time was wasted by the healthcare industry at large waiting to see whether meaningful use would be delayed. So I think that there was probably maybe some of that time lag is the fault of various folks in the industry. But when it comes down to it, when you're still clarifying your requirements, and yet you already have implementations that are going on, you've approached the project wrong. And so from a PME standpoint, you've lost. You've already this is already a failed venture. Whether there's a significant number of providers who meet the bare minimum to achieve their metrics or not, I don't think that we have engaged patients as a result of implementing meaningful use stage 2 in the majority of the provider organizations. Yeah. I'm sure that there are outliers. I'm sure that there are people who are truly loving every minute of their MU2, and not just the implementation, but the actual, the deployment, the rollout, and they're loving the organizational change management, and they think that it has increased their staff's productivity and that they're able to see more patients more effectively, and that is the hope. And I'm sure that some people are deriving that value, but I am not seeing it.
Well, I guess I found someone more optimistic than I, which is rare. But I think the thing that I take is that organizations are going to have to do MU. So regardless of the impacts, I don't think most, especially hospitals, have no choice. So meaningful use is here to stay, and I think stage 3 is even going to be more of a challenge. So hopefully they can spend the time to do it right.
I hope they can, yeah. Because I want the data. I want that data, right? I mean, that's what it all boils down to. But the data capture the data capture mechanisms are still so kludgy that it's detrimental to patient care right now. Yeah.
And we come full circle. Meaningful use brings us back to data. Thank you so much for being with me today, Mandi.
Thanks, John.
We'll have you back again.
Okay.